Hey guys, welcome to my channel. It is Mrs. Style yet again today. Today I actually just want to share some tips with you guys, specifically some tips of buying a car. So what things should you consider when you buying a car, whether your first car or you're buying another car? So these are just some of the tips that I thought of, and I thought it would be worthwhile just to share it with you. Okay, personally I do believe that if you can buy a car cash, definitely go for it. For me, that's the first price. Save for it and then buy it cash, and just know that you're not paying off that car over 5 years if you are able to save for it. However, I am aware that that's not the case for everyone. Not everyone is able to take some time and wait till they're able to save for the car to buy cash. Some people actually have specific needs that are quite urgent, and most of the people in South Africa definitely do buy cars through financing. So that's specifically what I'm going to be focusing on today. Tips for you when buying a car through bank financing. But the first and the very most important thing is affordability. So I think before you go to the bank to ask them how much you qualify for, it's very important for you to actually look at your income, look at your expenses, look at how much you left with at the end of each and every month. Of the amount that you left with, what percentage of that can you actually afford to pay for a car on a monthly basis? The bank will always tell you what you can afford based on your net income and only the monthly deductions that they can see coming off your account, which are your debit orders. But you know that you have other expenses. For instance, you might have black tax that you've committed to every month. So you need to consider everything. So I just want you to actually be realistic and be honest. Look at your income, look at your expenses on a monthly basis and say, okay, so at the end of the month, I'm left with, after paying everything, all my expenses and all my commitments, I'm left with 8,000 rand. How much of that 8,000 rand can I afford to actually pay for a car? So once you do that exercise, it's very important to also, secondly, consider all the other costs. So I don't want you to just consider the car payment and say, okay, of the 8,000 rand, I can afford a car that's cost 3,000 rand. Not really. That's not just the only expense that's related to a car. You have to consider the insurance cost of the car. You have to consider the fuel. You have to consider things like tracker. So that's the second thing that you really need to consider, other related expenses. What I would then do to just get a good indication of these expenses is, if I know I want to buy a Polo Vivo, for example, I know how much it will cost me on a monthly basis, right? I have an estimate. I can actually call up an insurance and give them my profile, tell them where I live, my driving history and the car I want to buy and the model, and they can actually give you an estimate of the insurance cost per month before you even buy the car. So it's very much possible for you to be able to estimate how much you can pay for other expenses as well. So I've made an example of a Polo Vivo as a car that let's say we are trying to buy, but I do want to highlight something, which is when deciding on the model that you want to buy, it is important to consider your driving experience. It is also important to consider your needs. Driving experience, what do I mean? If I'm a new driver, I just got my license yesterday. I just started working, I've been saving, and I think I'm ready to commit to a car. As someone who hasn't really driven before, I would say consider things like buying a starter pack, the cars that fall under starter packs. You know, there's your Polos, your Hyundais, and others. And you have to consider things such as the color of the car as well. White is the most affordable car to actually repair if you have accidents. That's something to consider. And you also have to consider, in terms of the model, is it easier and cheap to get, or more affordable to get those parts, the parts of the car? For instance, A Mercedes-Benz, to repair a Mercedes-Benz is definitely very expensive compared to repairing a Hyundai. And it's easier for you to get second-hand parts for Hyundai than Mercedes-Benz. And then in terms of considering your needs, for instance, if you're a bachelor in your 20s and you're just living your best life, do you really need to buy an SUV that is an 8-seater, which is a family car, you know? Why must you pay so much for a car that you don't really need in terms of a day-to-day basis? Unless you are preparing for a family, but if really for the next few years you know that's going to be your life, why not buy something that's quite practical for the type of lifestyle you have and the types of day-to-day needs that you have? So now you've decided on the model that you're going for based on your driving experience and your needs. You've also considered your affordability on a month-to-month basis by also taking into account other car-related expenses like insurance and fuel and a car tracker. So you kind of have an idea of, okay, at the end of the month, if I go for this type of car, these are the expenses that I'll pay and this is how much I'll be left with. In how much that you'll be left with, I think it's quite important to make sure that you can actually breathe. You need to make sure that after paying for your car and all these expenses, at the end of the month, you're still able to breathe. You still have some extra income to actually survive and live your life, but most importantly, to actually grow your income. You want to be able to save still. You want to be able to invest. You don't just want to pay for your car and your house and food and that's it, and your salary basically is there to do those things. Once you're happy with your budget, then you can start shopping online. You can start looking at cars online that actually work with the amounts that you have in your budget. I would actually say it's also good to look at second-hand cars. I actually don't think you should be buying a brand new car unless you really can afford it. But even if it's not your first car, if you can buy a second-hand car with a reasonable mileage, you should consider that. The reason for that is the concept of depreciation. Depreciation is the fact that when it comes to cars, all cars lose value the moment you drive it out of the dealership. So the moment you drive a brand new car or a second-hand car out of a dealership, it loses value. So then when buying a second-hand car, there are certain things that you need to consider. You definitely need to make sure you're buying it at an approved dealership. You definitely need to look at the mileage. I wouldn't recommend for you to buy a car that has more than 100,000 kilometers. You definitely need to check with the dealer that the car is accident-free. You also need to just check at the dealer that the car has been serviced. It has a full service history. While looking online for your car and having all those considerations into account, whether you're buying it brand new or second-hand, I'd also advise you to contact your bank or your banker and just ask for them to give you an approval, how much they approve you for. Remember, they might approve you for more than you've budgeted for. Stick to your budget. However, what is important in this process of trying to find finances through a bank is don't just go to your bank only. If you bank with, let's say, NetBank, don't just go to NetBank and ask for them to approve your financing. Approach all banks. Give them your income statement as they will require it, and just compare what interest rates each bank give you. Trust me, sometimes your own bank might not give you the lowest interest rates. So what is important here is to compare across different banks what interest rates that you get. And then even when you have the lowest interest rate with a certain bank, try and negotiate if possible. Can you even lower it even further, you know? I do think that some interest rates you should stay away from. Let's say the lowest interest rates that you get back is 18%. Trust me, I've seen people with car financing of 18% interest rate. Let's say that's the lowest you get across all banks. Honestly, that's not the wisest decision that you can make. If you see that your finances are not in order and you're not getting the best interest or a reasonable interest rate deal, rather ask the banker, what can you do to improve your finances? Maybe in the next 6 months or the next 3 months, there's certain accounts you can close, certain things you can pay off that will actually help lower that interest rate. So if that's the case, then you just pause and make sure that you work on that first. and then proceed afterwards. But if you get a reasonable interest rate, prime plus 1, prime plus 2, 3, 4, I guess that's fine. 5, prime rate plus 5% if you're pushing it, that seems okay, but I wouldn't advise anything greater than 15% on interest rate, because it actually works out to be super expensive. So you must be wise about the interest rate that you sign for. Still, in terms of financing, one thing you must be very aware of is Mercedes-Benz is not a bank. Toyota is not a bank. When you go to a car dealership, most of these car dealerships will tell you that they have in-house financing, of which they do offer. However, you must be aware of the fact that they are not banks. They are not able to give you these loans themselves. So what does this mean? This means that they actually work with banks. So in our example, you get financing with Toyota, right? You do everything through Toyota, get your interest rate through Toyota, and every month you're paying Toyota. But the reality is Toyota has an agreement with, let's say, a net bank or any other bank in the background where they're the actual ones giving you the financing. But in the interest rate that you're paying, net bank or any bank is able to recover their portion, and they're able to give a certain portion to Toyota, right? So it actually means there's a premium, there's an excess that you're paying only because you're using the middle party. So if you go directly to the bank, you'll be able to save on this extra interest or premium that you're paying. So it's always advisable for you to go directly to the bank and not get financing through a dealership, because they will charge you extra. Lastly, something to also be aware of when arranging for financing, the option for balloon payment. Stay away from balloon payments. If in order for you to get a certain car, you have to have a balloon payment, honestly, it means you cannot afford that car. You cannot afford a car if you have to select the balloon payment option. Why do I say you must stay away from the balloon payment option? This is simply because at the end of the 5 years, let's say you get the car financing for 5 years, and at the end of the 5 years you have to pay 10,000 rand. At the end of the 5 years, the 10,000 rand you're paying is actually an amount that includes interest. And the last tip from me, guys, is say no to extras. For example, at the dealership, they might offer you an extra service, which is tinting the windows of your car. You need to say no to these extras and actually go and do that alone, directly with the service provider. It is better to do this than for you to actually agree to the extra at the dealership, and the dealership will then include the extra to the loan amount that you'll be paying at the bank, meaning that you will be paying interest for tinting the car windows. Really, that's an amount that you can save on your own and do it at a later stage, or you can just use your current available cash to do it. So say no to extras to avoid extra interest charges that are unnecessary. I hope that this was useful, guys, and please do share if you have any experience or any things that you've learned and you'd like to share with the rest of the people. Please do comment below. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video. Thank you so much, guys. Love you so much. Till next time.